Namaste, and a very warm welcome to all our guests who are tuned in from all around the world. India Calling is a story of travelers from around the globe who come to India with a very specific seeking of knowing themselves. Today, we have one such guest, Amy Landry. Amy Landry comes from, she's a yoga teacher and Ayurvedic professional who just doesn't study these traditions, but she also leads others into following this way of life. We'll be diving deep into her personal stories, the moments that changed her, and what really brought her to India, and share this light with others. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very lovely to be here and such a pleasure.
Lovely. We'll dive deep into our discussion today. My first question to you is, what led you to India, and when was the moment you really felt, I have to pack and go? If you can share your journey.
Gosh, that's a big question. And I feel like in some sense for everybody that has an interest in going to India, we each have our own unique story or desire for going to India. And yet I always think that there is a common thread for foreigners who wish to travel to India. And I think really for me, there was always a spiritual yearning and a spiritual longing, even from my early childhood. And really, obviously, it's a huge story, but, so many things along the way, this confluence of different experiences across my life really compelled me to travel specifically to India. I'd spent many years traveling throughout all of Asia when I worked professionally in my early 20s, but I had not specifically yet gone to India despite being engaged in yoga and yoga sadhana and yoga practice. And of course, I think really it was when I did my very first yoga teacher training, I saw some incredible photos from a friend who'd just come back from India, and she was a bit of a photographer, and it was just so captivating to see her photos. And so I think also because I was immersed in the foundational studies to teach yoga to others and share yoga with others, I felt strong, not only a yearning, but a duty to go to India to steep in the culture that yoga had developed within. And so very, very shortly after, I organized my first trip to India, which was 3 months long. And since then, I've been back sometimes twice a year, but let's say on average, usually around once a year. Yeah.
Very nice. What was your first impression upon landing in India?
So I'm sure that's also different for everybody. I honestly, for me personally, I really feel there was like a serenity. I experienced this serenity within this sort of storm of sights and sounds and sensations, which for many people can feel overwhelming. And yet I felt this real sense of delight, almost like a homecoming. I'm sure there's people out there that have been to India who obviously are from outside India that can relate to that feeling internally. And so I was very excited and I felt very at home. And there was almost this undertone of, yes, serenity and calm, despite how, busy it felt. Particularly on that first trip, I went to more of the stereotypical tourist sites. And so you can expect that there's always a lot of people and crowds. And yet I always felt like there was this underlying calm within that, which was very enticing. And I wanted to just immerse myself in more of that. Yeah.
Which year was your first journey, and how many times have you been to India so far?
So I have been to India 12 times now. And before I had children, I would go for very longish periods. So I would go for, at least a month, but sometimes a number of months each year. But I've been traveling literally since January 2012 was my first trip. January
Wow.
2012. Yeah.
Very nice. Where exactly did you go the first time you visited India?
So that was 3 months. And I initially went with my husband. He came for half the trip, but he did have to return back here to Australia. And so I traveled the rest of that time solo. We flew into the south first and did a lot of South India. We actually started in the west in Mumbai and traveled down and did Hampi and Goa. And again, more of the typical places, found our way down to Kerala. And then, so it was sort of more of the west side of the country down through the south. And then from there, we flew up to the north and did Delhi and Agra, Rishikesh, Jaipur. We fit in a lot in that first trip. But again, I think it was more of the more common places that people go to. Yeah.
what was it like traveling in India in 2012 as a solo traveler when everywhere across the globe had a taboo on India? There was a lot of things said about India. How did, how was your experience?
I don't think I was exposed to any of that, if I'm honest. It was just such a strong calling to go that I honored that strong sense that I had to go to India and spend time learning about the heritage as a way to deepen and support my own studies in yoga. And shortly after, I came to formally study Ayurveda. And maybe I was a little bit ignorant to what anybody else thought. And I just trusted that intuitive sense that it was somewhere I had to go. And I had the most magnificent time. I literally cried my eyes out the day I had to come home. I didn't want to come home, and I've had that experience many times over. There's something so captivating about it. So it was a really transformative experience going to India, and perhaps it was a little bit maybe ignorant spending so much time traveling solo, but I felt very centered and safe and trusting, quite grounded in being there, as if in some way it was meant to happen and that I was being almost like divinely guided and supported and protected during that time. And that was the first of obviously many trips thereafter.
Was there like specific moment in your first trip, right? Because in the first trip, you are really getting used to India. And was there moments that you still cherish from that trip? Like, is there any spiritually active moments that you experienced at that point?
Honestly, I'm not sure if there was one isolated moment, but something I distinctly remember feeling is there was this almost constant sense of like inner refuge and quietude and peace within the chaos, within the intensity of the experience, and in some sense the unpredictability of the experience. Things don't necessarily operate in the same way that they do here in the Western world, certainly. And learning to have to embody a lot of patience and surrender and see it as a part of the experience, I think helps one to really relax in and receive what's going on around them. But I think, honestly, it was just witnessing that I felt a deep sense of refuge and quietude despite everything that was going on around me. Yeah.
So looking back 13 years, of coming to India, what are your favorite spots if you have to pick three, considering that you've traveled across India?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I do love going to the South. I love South Indian food. So probably I would say somewhere in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or Kerala. But I also think going to somewhere like Orissa, going to Bhubaneswar and Puri is
Wow.
quite incredible because they're not places that foreigners often think to go to. And yet the temple architecture, the folk traditions are quite unique. So I would probably say that would be a place for people to consider going to for quite a different experience. It's so difficult to say, to pick three places because the country is so vast and there's so much difference, as you know, of course, between the customs, the culture, the food, the architecture, the textiles from place to place. And I think probably really I would just say to people, once you go one time, it's just planted that seed and every experience will be different no matter where you go to. But to ensure that you do experience, the differences between the North and the South and of course the East and the West, and really getting a taste of the flavor that can be experienced all across the country. And the beauty in that diversity is very special.
Wow. I mean, your focus is on yoga and Ayurveda. If you have to consider how your physical journey, through India's geography has shifted your understanding, or, how has this impacted your practices?
Probably, I would say that traveling to India has very much deepened my understanding of sampradaya, of lineage, of the traditional methods of learning. So between teacher and student have deepened my clarity around that, and my, I guess, receptivity and willingness to find refuge in the more subtle teachings of yoga and Ayurveda, because, yoga and Ayurveda are presented and pursued quite differently in the West compared to India. Generally speaking, of course, there's always exceptions. And I think that having that awareness can be a very potent way to enrich our own path if we are immersed in yoga and Ayurveda or any of the incredible Indic sciences and arts. Absolutely. Probably the one thing I would say is refining and deepening my understanding of the methods of learning, the relationship to teacher, and finding sort of moving away from the things that are very externally oriented and performative even, and appreciating more of the very subtle teachings and techniques, and also a greater appreciation for Shastra or traditional texts. And
I just got lost in the process of, listening to your experience itself. Could you also share about, you were learning around mantras and dealing with mantras with your students?
It really depends. I do try to teach more of a full spectrum of yoga. So I'm currently facilitating a 300-hour yoga teacher training. This is a fully online teacher training program for existing teachers that are seeking a greater understanding of yoga so they can respectfully represent yoga in its more full spectrum and cultural context. So that very much informs the work that I do. And of course, we do a lot of important Sanskrit studies, and from the foundation of Sanskrit studies, that in turn informs the mantra that we do, whether or not that is invocations, or if it's just general prayers, or if it is like japa mantras through a japa practice. So that would be more in a intensive sort of study format and training. When I facilitate group retreats and travels and whatnot, it's a part of the daily practices that we do when we come together and maybe do a morning or afternoon yoga practice. Of course, there is mantra there is pranayama there, sometimes there are kriyas. Of course, there's always asana there, but I do try to integrate all the different facets of yogic techniques in an accessible way. And that's also why I wrote the book that I'm releasing very soon, which is called The Ocean of Yoga. And this book aims to serve students and teachers around the world who just crave more knowledge and insight into that ocean, that vast spectrum of yoga. And maybe they don't have a resource, or maybe they don't have a teacher that can guide them. And so that book as well has been a tool. And there's a whole section on Sanskrit and on mantra in there as well, and the different types, and even just the history of Sanskrit, the value of sound and Sanskrit, and the role of Shruti, and the sanctity of sound and mantra as well. So this is a really important part of what I teach and share within my community. Yeah, absolutely.
One common theme that the West is now evolving in terms of yoga is beyond the mat. How can a spiritual traveler from across the globe, like coming to India, transition from, asana on a mat, that mindset, to experiencing yoga in every interaction in their life and environment?
Your question actually just reminded me of the very first time I attended a yoga class in India, and that was on the very first trip. Yes. And I remember it was so different. It wasn't anything like I'd experienced in the West. It was still physical. There was still asana, but the delivery was different. The intention was different. And I think that was actually quite a pivotal wake-up call. I'd felt so confident in my teaching. I'd taught many classes, and with many different sort of approaches and students in different environments. And yet here I was completely humbled by being taught and disseminated and facilitated in yoga. And I felt like this fresh student all over again. And I thought that was incredible. I was so inspired and excited by it. It really drove my desire to continue to study. I mean, I've also been a student of Odissi dance from Orissa for many, many years as well. And I do see the parallels in studying this dance form with yoga, which I speak a little bit about on social media from time to time. But, there is a real sadhana there, and spiritual depth there, and philosophical and textural kind of foundation. And to me, they both cultivate tapas and discipline. So in terms of moving beyond sort of that more physically dynamic sort of exercise focused practice, I really believe it is just a part of how we mature on as we continue to practice and study. And also I think, certainly traveling to India can support that growth and that maturation. And I think also too, if we have a deep respect and care for the cultural context and heritage that yoga developed within, I think we naturally seek out the other, let's say, techniques and teachings of yoga beyond those that are very, very physical, which most of the physical practices are actually quite modern developments of yoga. And when we realize that, I think it sparks a little bit of interest and inquiry in learning more and seeking out more. And certainly going to India can support that interest.
Wow, beautiful. You also very holistic in terms of learning all traditional sciences of India. Like you picked yoga, Ayurveda, Sanskrit, Kalaripayattu, like a wide range, right? Like how do these sister sciences actually, help you? If you can share some light for our audience. I'm sure you're following the Indian calendar system as well, the dates and, cycles
I
and
am.
so on.
Yeah, the Vedic calendar, yes, and Vedic festivals, yes, I do. Honestly, I think that it just informs my life. Like when I guess my hope is that I can feel like I'm living yoga. And when I say I'm living yoga, it's not like isolated just to asana, right? Or some techniques over here, but it's like how it informs my whole life. And the more I learn about yoga and the more I study these other sciences and traditions of India, even if I'm only studying them quite lightly, but I'm just having a bit of an experience or exposure to them, it deepens my own path. It provides spiritual enrichment and it makes me realize how they are all very, very connected. The Western mind, I think, sees everything as separate and an isolated practice, but I think that all these incredible traditions are very much integrated, and my experience of studying them deeply informs the way that I live in the world.
You talk about artful Ayurveda. How does artful Ayurveda help students cultivate health and harmony?
Well, using the term artful Ayurveda, I think, is implying that there is a thoughtfulness and a reverence and a patience in applying Ayurvedic principles into our daily lives. So it's not about quick trends. I think in the West, we're drinking these turmeric lattes and, doing all these little things that, the oil pulling, but we don't actually realize what they're rooted in, and they're not actually deeply connected to, clarity and knowledge, and also a recognition that we need to remain in relationship with the seasons of nature, yes, around us. That's very much a big part of Ayurveda, but also our own internal like transitions and life seasons, the stage of life that we're in and the role that we play in our life, in our society and in our family. It's not, Ayurveda often just gets marketed as like the food that you're eating and the turmeric that you're adding to your beverage and or on the body. And of course those things all have a benefit, but they're quite surface level. And I think that artful Ayurveda really implies that we are taking the time to learn the foundations of Ayurveda and cultivate greater clarity and awareness and harmony with seasons around us and the seasons of life. So that's why I particularly frame it in that way.
If you can shed some light around the seasons, right? Because Ayurveda was written in India, practiced in India, but the seasons across the globe, it's very different. So, coming from the West, how do you incorporate yoga into season in Australia or let's say UK or Canada, how does that work for you?
Well, here in Australia, we actually we do have different seasons, because if you actually look at the Australian Aboriginal culture here, they also have their own seasonal system too. You could say that it's very, very Ayurvedic to have awareness of these Indigenous seasons and patterns when we're talking about the climate and the environment through the Australian Indigenous peoples of this land. That also could be considered very Ayurvedic. But let's just, generally speaking, it's about an attunement and understanding the influence of the elements that are at play within each of the different seasons and cycles of the year. Obviously, India has a unique weather system and seasonal patterns, even across different regions of the country. It's not all the same. It might be winter everywhere, but, winter in the south is very different to winter in the north, right? So it's not just about labeling something winter, but it's having a relationship, like going outside and having a relationship with nature, with the sky, and seeing what is present and thereby letting.
So one of the common questions that travelers who come to India, my experience is, once I start following yoga and Ayurveda, and these people come from different religious background. So the question is, I am a Catholic. Does following yoga, Ayurveda make me a Hindu? Is this a question that you get asked as well?
Yeah, I think, you get the question, is this a Hindu practice? Is this a religious practice? And of course, this is a huge topic, and maybe some might say that I'm not qualified to answer that as someone who is not born in the source culture of these traditions. But what I would say is that I've always had a very welcoming experience. I think that as long as you show a great respect for these traditions, you actually feel extremely welcome. And in terms of being Hindu specifically, I think we need to look at the history of the term Hindu, because the term Hindu has changed over many centuries because of the, British colonial rule. But before that as well, the term got used in a different way during Islamic colonization. And then prior to that, it was different. The word Hindu actually relates to being a geographical term, the people sort of on one side of the Indus River. So, it's a very nuanced and big subject. But of course, people, when they ask that question, they are really referring to it, well, is Ayurveda religious? And I think that's more of what the question is. And I would personally say that I think yoga particularly transcends religion. You don't have to be converted, and there's no doctrine, there's no one and only text, so like the Quran or like the Bible. And I think therefore, and when we look at the evolution of yoga over a very long time, it has continued to develop, to change, to evolve, and yoga has been informed by other traditions as well. When we look at the Vedic tradition, the ascetic tradition, there's not one way of yoga. There's so many sub-traditions and paths. And really, Hindu is an umbrella term for many of these different traditions, whether it's a Shakta tradition, a Shaiva tradition, a Vaishnava tradition, and there's connections with Buddhism as well. Buddhism has heavily informed many yoga texts and teachings. And so I think it would be an oversimplification to say that yoga is religious, but it has been developed within a certain maybe religious and spiritual kind of context. And so it's not separate to religion, but it's not religion in itself. But I think that kind of conversation is a very nuanced one. But I think that if you come from any other religious background other than, one of the Hindu traditions, I absolutely think you can wholeheartedly walk the path of yoga and being certainly engaged in Ayurveda, because Ayurveda primarily is about tending to the mind and the body and having a lot of health and resilience and longevity. So I absolutely think that yoga kind of transcends religion.
That's beautifully put. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. One other thing that you mentioned, early in our call is masters and gurus. Can you share the impact these masters and gurus have had in your life? And can you also share about your masters?
So I've had, of course, a number of different teachers, and then I have those who I would hold more in that regard as the guru, whether or not that's through my Odissi studies or yoga studies. And I suppose in a very simple sense, I think the relationship with the guru and the teacher creates a humility that doesn't quite exist when you don't have that relationship. And the relationship to the guru is one that not only humbles us, but it teaches us great patience, because the greatest masters and gurus, they don't just like freely give out information whenever you ask for it or want it. It's like everything is fed very, very slowly, and for a very good reason, that you need to imbibe those teachings and techniques and work with them for an extended period of time before you're given anything else. And in the Western world, we're not used to that. We're used to being able to have whatever we want, whenever we want it. And so having the role of the guru and the teachers through the more traditional lens, I think, is, yes, it's very humbling. It teaches us great patience and surrender. And when I say surrender, I don't mean that we lose our autonomy or sovereignty. We don't hand over everything to the teacher. We still have to have self-responsibility for our actions and decisions and choices. But there is definitely some solace and refuge to be found in embracing that relationship with the guru and with the teacher. And of course, that can be concerning for people, because there are many teachers and gurus that have, what we say, have like fallen from grace, meaning that they may not have been who they proclaimed they were. They may not have been this great person. They might have, done things that are not so great. But at the same time, we can't throw out the teachings if we, choose not to stay with the teacher, right? The teachings are what is timeless and what is potent in giving us some transformation through, on our path through our studies. Yeah.
Thank you. One question in our community that comes up is I've been doing yoga asanas for the last 5 years. I have perfected my asanas. What should I do next? Should I go to India? Where can I find more about it? Yeah.
Well, first I would say, what is perfect asana? Is that something external, the way the shape looks, or is that your state of being internally in that posture, right? Because we can get quite competitive in asana practice, in postural yoga, and it takes us away from the goal. And the goal being, to promote physical and mental steadiness, to thereby be able to experience meditation or to move into meditation, for the mind to be quiet. But I would say to people, if you think you have mastered postural yoga, are you familiar with using mudras? Are you familiar with using bandhas? Are you working with pranayama and kumbhaka and all these? Because these are all very still physical things. They're still physical, tangible things that we do with this body. And so I would say to people to maybe seek out a teacher that can guide you with these more subtle, potent practices that you can use with the postures and engage the body, but they're a little bit more refined. If people are really interested in staying physical with their practice, I would recommend integrating these other techniques. But it's also about trusting that you will find the right teacher and the right teachings at the right time, So mastery of postures, I think we can get to a certain level, and then sometimes we realize, we missed the point altogether. The point was not about attaining these really seemingly advanced postures, because at the end of the day, if you're still the same person and it hasn't changed you very much, then maybe we've lost our way a little bit. That's what I would say.
Perfect. You've been leading a lot of retreats in India. Could you share some of the experiences that your students have gone through in India? Like, how did India retreat change their perspective? Because you could have done this retreat anywhere in the world. Being in India,
Yeah.
what was the difference?
Well, my personal intention for taking groups to India is because I would love for people to have a very transformative experience going to India. Quite often when people plan their own travel in India, they can have some negative experiences. They can feel very overwhelmed. They can get sick very easily. They might even get scammed. Like, there's all these potential risks that we take if we plan our own India travel. And so I really wanted to coordinate these experiences for people. Sometimes I teach them in like a retreat format where we do yoga every day and we don't travel around so much. But then sometimes I've organized like group tours where we do a lot of things and we go place to place to place. And if you've never been to India before, you just wouldn't be able to coordinate that same kind of program in the same amount of time. It would just be probably too intense and too much. But when you can do it in a group with someone who knows what they're doing, of course, it's much easier. And then you obviously have the connection with other people to experience it with you together. And that can be very, very special. But importantly, I wanted people to experience parts of India beyond the typical tourist sites. I wanted people to come to temples where they didn't see other foreigners and where, everybody's dressed in like traditional clothing and, wearing kurta or sari and because you have a very different experience. Not that there's anything wrong with going and seeing all the main sites and wearing Western clothing. I'm not criticizing that at all. But I think that once you have an experience in India where you maybe go off the beaten trail, so to speak, or go to the less commonly known places for foreigners, that is, and maybe you do dress more traditionally and you respect the local customs, your experience is even richer. It's a wonderful deepening of your experience of India. And I think that that's very, very special. Yeah.
On that topic, would you also like to add some tips for solo travelers, especially women traveling from across the globe, coming to India for spiritual reasons? What would be your 2 cents for them?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think if you're booking a trip to India, particularly as a female, particularly if you're going solo, I would say look at doing homestays and staying with people and families. Of course, through recommendations of people but I think homestays can be wonderful because you have this safe haven, this safe place to go to at night where you feel like you really have people there that are very much taking care of you and you're being fed and beautiful food, and you just have a more relaxed and safe experience. But it's also, there's something special about homestays or even like heritage stays. Staying in a heritage accommodation can be very lovely as well. You know, staying in hotels can be quite risky unless they're part of like a global chain, like around the world. I know people that have, you know, shown up to a hotel thinking it will be completely fine and it was not at all. And that's happened to me a couple of times as well. I would say, you know, to trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel good or right, then to trust that no matter what's going on around you. Things, you know, as a woman, avoid traveling solo at nighttime, or more specifically, avoid arriving somewhere late at night, especially if there's the chance that you might get lost or there might be a problem. But perhaps relating back to something I just said earlier, but I would also recommend that women dress not only modestly with respect to the culture, but I would also strongly recommend dressing more traditionally, like investing in long kurtas, even if you're wearing them over jeans or leggings or what have you, having the dupatta, having your shawl, and you just feel more comfortable walking around and sightseeing and spending your time. I think that you do have a little bit of a different experience because it's just a reflection of your respect and courtesy for the people and for the culture of India. And that really, I think, enhances the quality of the experience that you can have, definitely.
Super. You have an upcoming retreat in 2026. Would you like to talk to us about that?
Well, actually, it's just happened. We were in Karnataka and we had an Ayurvedic retreat, and we went to Udupi, which was an incredible experience because it's not a place that foreigners often go to. And we were there for a week and immersed in a lot of the Vedic heritage in art and Ayurveda, and of course the beautiful food of South India. And we did yoga every day and had Ayurvedic treatments. And I literally just got back about a week ago. So that was a really special experience because, again, like I was alluding to earlier, you know, we went to places that not a lot of people go to. We went to Sringeri and to, you know, the beautiful Pitam there that Adi Shankaracharya first installed and established. And there was no other foreigners there. And it was so calm and there was no lines and there was no chaos. And the architecture was just sublime. And we were able to go in and out, have darshan multiple times over. And it was really, really special. So
very nice. Would you like to share about your book, The Ocean of Yoga?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So The Ocean of Yoga is releasing in most countries around the world on March 31st, so coming up very soon, 2026. And it's published with Shambhala Publications, who are a very esteemed publisher in the United States, very much known for their books on Buddhism and yoga and spiritual traditions. And then it's available around the world through Penguin Random House. For anybody tuning into this in India, at the moment it's available for pre-order as an ebook. I think there's a little bit of a delay for the physical book, but you can get it on Amazon, pre-order it now as an ebook. So The Ocean of Yoga is the title, and it is a book for students, seekers, teachers of yoga who, just really want to honor yoga in its full spectrum of teachings, traditions. There's a section about the history of yoga and even a little bit more about the idea of religion and Hinduism, as we've already spoken about. And the book also teaches on subtle anatomy because particularly in the West, we put a lot of emphasis on Western anatomy and physiology as yoga teachers and students. But this book really aims to highlight the subtle yogic anatomy, which is, I think, even more important and relevant. And then there is a section on really the different traditions and paths of yoga, lineage, the role of the guru. And then there is definitely more of a practical section of the book where we look at different techniques, more from the out to the inward, sort of like Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga, but a little bit bigger than that, a little bit more expanded with some less commonly known techniques and approaches to yoga in that section. And then the last section of the book focuses on Shastra of traditional texts, you know, the more common, so Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutra, but also some less commonly known texts as well, like the Yoga Yajnavalkya is also in there. And then obviously touches on Sanskrit and sound and mantra. So it's intended to be a very comprehensive book,
Right.
And yet very foundational as well. It's very accessible
Got
for
it.
everybody.
Right.
It's not a huge book. It's easily digestible, but it's intended to kind of represent this full ocean of yoga, inspired on which direction to
Yeah.
take and how to move forward. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Beautiful. I'm glad you have put this together. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful for Western seekers, especially, who are getting into the world of yoga to, understand what all is there, what all areas that they can explore. If you could also tell our guests how they can reach you, how they can connect with you, about your social handles, that'll be nice.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so probably the best place to send people to is either my Instagram, which is Amy E. Landry. So there's an E in the middle there, Amy E. Landry on Instagram. And then also my website is the same, amyelandry.com. If you're interested in the book, you just search my name online, The Ocean of Yoga, Amy Landry, and you should find it. But there is actually a page on my website. And if you go to the books page, you scroll down, you can find global links. So, Canada, America, the UK, Australia, India, different places that you can pre-order the book. And pre-orders do really make a difference. So, yes, but thank you so much for your time. This has just been such a pleasure and a beautiful conversation, and hopefully the first of
Super.
many.
Likewise, I totally enjoyed this. So much of learning, in this conversation itself, and your journey is very inspiring.
Feeling is mutual. Thank you immensely for your
Thank you
time,
so
and
much.
thank you to everybody listening as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.